So, hello everybody. Today we are joined by Alan Meyerson, who needs no introduction in the orchestral mixing scene, but he's a score mixer with a lot of experience. So, Alan, you've mixed lots of the scores of the past 20 years, like Pirates of the Caribbean, Inception, Dark Knight. So, thanks for coming on here to talk a bit about orchestral mixing.
My pleasure.
Yeah, so I guess, let's start with the first question. So, how do you retain clarity in a dark mix? Because let me elaborate a bit on that. So I think that one of the mistakes that many people do is to boost the treble a lot to get clarity. But I think it's kind of a cheap way to get clarity, especially for orchestral. It can make things a bit synthy sounding and fake sounding. So how do you keep a mix sort of like dark-ish, big and it has a nice depth, but you still kind of retain separation and clarity? Do you have any tips for that?
Well, sometimes I do boost the top end
Yeah.
and use that, but that is really more for a particular effect. If that was the some projects want that sort of kind of hyper extended frequency response. But when I have a dark mix, it's really you have to sort of decide a lot of different factors. The one that does the least amount of value is additive EQ. The thing that really is much more productive is searching out frequencies that aren't necessary in a particular sound, and you could do that by just sweeping through it. What I do and try to do is I just try to listen and try to have my ear pick up something that is, if it's in an acoustic recording, it could be just a resonance from the room, or just sort of even sometimes the fundamental resonance gets a little bit overwhelming, and then to do some intelligent cuts to start clearing out what isn't necessary. So if the information that I'm looking for is in the high mids, I might cut in the 200 to 500 range, just out some stuff I don't need, or even do a high pass, where I'm just clearing out that's an old New York dance record trick, is just get rid of everything below 200 except for the bass and the bass drum, so
Yeah.
that's my world. But with orchestral stuff, if it's a dark, if it's a live orchestral recording and it's sort of darkish, then you hope that the orchestrator and the composer sort of thought about some of that voicing, and that the arrangement's going to help you. And then the other really important factor, which is in all of orchestral music, or in all of mixing, is imaging, and like what goes left, what goes right in a stereo environment, so that you have a balance between sort of a frequency shape balance, and also a dynamic and musically shaped balance across the stereo image, so that you don't end up with too much information blocked into one area where it gets very dense. And if you can sort of be able to do that to create a little bit more depth, then you'll find it's much easier to hear things even in a dark environment, mix, than it would be if you didn't think through stuff like that.
Yeah, true. I mean, because if you don't really rely on the treble to get your clarity, you have to get it in other ways. So stereo field makes sense to kind of isolate certain instruments. So what do you do when you have a live orchestral recording? That's because, of course, you're kind of stuck with the stereo field in some way. Of course, you can play with the mics, but say like you mostly got Decatry, for example, then you can maybe get a bit more stereo field with the outrigs or surrounds, but you can't really kind of repan something dramatically. So then you kind of have to hope that the recording is good. That's what you're saying.
Well, you even more than hope that the recording is good, is hope that the orchestration is good, because it
Yeah.
really comes down to that. If and yeah, I mean, it gets complicated when there's only so much you can do. In that you can, I find that I can shade things a little bit. So say I have a melody that's playing in the cello and also in the bassoon, if it's, to use an example,
Yeah.
like the contrabassoon is doubling a bass thing or a cello thing. If I pan the bassoon in a little bit, off of hard left and right access, sort of get a little bit more selective about where in the stereo field I'm panning things, that I can create some imaging that way too. It doesn't have to be just hard left and right. There's a lot of points in between, so you just have to be very specific about where you pan things. You don't have to. The music I do is, I'm not really trying to recreate a live performance. It's not really,
Mm.
no one's saying to me, "Oh, I want this." I mean, occasionally they are saying that, but for the most part, I'm just trying to create an exciting environment. So if I need to cheat the panning, I'll cheat the panning. I do it all the time with certain elements like the bass. Sometimes I'll take one spot mic from the bass and pan it to the left,
Yeah.
just to create a little bit more width on the low end, especially if it's playing alongside of a synth bass or something like that. And then sometimes I don't want to do that. Sometimes I just want to have it be more organically placed. But I'm not really. I think about the stereo images as used to. And you would have to say obviously in 180 degrees, but it's not even really 180 degrees. It's like 110 degrees,
It's true.
or it's 200 degrees. It's depending on how you look at it, and if you're working in surround and then you're working in stereo. But the fact that the speakers are basically at 11 o'clock and 1 o'clock, you can.
Yeah.
It's. I was just actually listening to a fantastic record from the 70s that I listen to all the time, on my ATCs. This Chick Corea record. It's a piano. It's My Spanish Heart, and I was amazed at um, how beautifully they thought about their imaging. And even if a lot, they started with mono,
Hmm.
and then spread out from there, which isn't something I tend to do.
That's
And
interesting.
yeah, and so the margins were less filled, and the center was more dense. And at first I thought, well, I don't think I'm going to like that. And
Hmm.
then as it came along, I realized that I did like it. Hold on one second. Luigi.
So that's something I wanted to ask. So in a live recording, since you're kind of stuck-ish with the panning, even if you overdub, I mean, strings, brass, winds, you can't still just pan the bassoons really, other than playing with the closed mics. So do you
Well,
usually
actually,
keep this
that's not.
on actually?
Yeah, but it's not necessarily true. I also have mid-distance mics that are above each section,
Yeah,
and I
true.
do those too. So, and sometimes when I'm talking about panning, I'm not talking about a massive pan switch. I'm talking about subtly moving things in,
Yeah,
a little bit, and creating. It's amazing what you can do with very little. The longer I'm doing this, the more I realize that the less I do, the better it is.
yeah,
So
true.
I can create a better image, just by moving things a tiny bit, and then I break that rule all the time and do massive changes. And
Yeah,
create, now with certain plugins you can certainly create width that's wider than the imaging without really the kind of phase artifacts that you used to get with some of the
mm,
old plugins. So I do that too. It's just I do whatever it takes. It's all based on the piece and the philosophy of the project. Some people want a little, like I just did this, the Book of Boba Fett, which just came out yesterday. And my philosophy with that was to really create sort of a dynamic soundscape, in
mm.
stereo. And so I used a lot of widening and stuff like that. Whereas other things, I tend to keep it a little bit more controlled,
Yeah.
especially when it's very dialogue driven.
Yeah, there's something with stereo field that's, I mean, I tried to play with stereo enhancers in the past, but I think it quickly sounds very fake and just overly wide, especially on headphones. You start feeling this weird sound as if the stereo image was getting closer, wider, but also closer and more 2D. Like you kind of lose the depth as you widen things. I notice with
Yes,
stereo
but
enhancers.
there are plugins now that are way better
Yeah,
at that. Like the Leapwing Stage One is a really great
yeah, mm,
for doing that. And as long as I have this. Anyone that's like taken my seminar knows that I have the 20% rule. It's like I always set it to where I like it, and then I back it off 20% because that's usually enough.
yeah,
Obviously wideners are the same, but yeah, and then there I do tend to use some frequency based widening, like on the ozone, or even the air, the Avid Air
yeah,
uh, widener that gives you frequency widening, where you can go up to 4 bands of widening. I'll use that a little bit on the top end,
Yeah,
so yeah,
you can
I
get
find
away.
that
Mm,
by doing subtly, it's not, I don't really get the artifacts as
that's
much.
cool. Yeah, the way I found to kind of get a wider sound without artifacts is with the waves doubler, actually. I do like an inverted stereo slap delay. So I have like the left channel goes to the right and the right goes to the left, but kind of low in the mix, like -9, -10. And I find that when I push this, it creates some sort of, like, you don't really hear the echoes because it's only like 30 ms, 50 ms, but it's enough to sort of widen things, I think it's kind of like you were saying, putting the bass on the other side, the bass close mic you were saying before on the other side. It's kind of similar. Like if you have a sound that's mostly leaning right on one mic position, and then you have another one mixed underneath and it's leaning left, you kind of get a wider overall result. And I found that really interesting.
Yeah, no, that's a great way to do it. I do the same
Yeah,
thing at times. The other way you could do that, if you want to approach that, is by using a reverb where you're only using the early reflections,
true.
and you can
Mm.
do that with reversing the output of that reverb so that the early reflection is going to the other side.
Oh yeah,
There
yeah,
was
yeah, true.
a fantastic engineer. He's a classical engineer. He's won so many Grammys, it's ridiculous. Named Professor Keith Johnson. He has this record label called Reference Recordings, and his whole big thing is he spot mics everything at 17 centimeters, and then off pans by about 9 dB the mic that is slightly off axis, so that every single one of his spot mics has a I unfortunately, with the kind of music that I do with film score, it would be a little bit too, you know, I try to minimalize mics, so it would
Mm.
be much of too many mics for my purposes. But I've done it in the past, and it actually works quite well. You could do it like to a brass section where you have your two, maybe you have your two brass mics, and then you could have a third brass mic and pan that off to the other side, and
Yeah,
with the French horns. But I find early reflections and using convolution reverbs actually work really well for stuff like that. And
yeah,
delays work too. You could do the same. I use the Kramer slap as a Kramer tape
yeah,
slap as a way to do that at a very short distance. For me, 50 milliseconds is a lot, so I would probably use a little bit less, but because 50 milliseconds, you can really, if there is any sort of transient, you will hear the two transients. But
yeah,
at,
true.
at -10, at -12, you probably wouldn't. So you're probably
Yeah,
okay.
so I do have like one at 30 milliseconds, one at 50. And yeah, at -10, you don't really feel it. On spiccatos, you sort of feel like it kind of extends it a bit more, but it's almost as
Yeah,
if you had more players. But
yeah,
I darken the top end after this, only on the delay signals. So the delays are actually darker, so you don't really feel the transient as much.
sure, yeah,
But the Kramer is a great tip. I actually use this one for tape. It's my main tape. I
right.
think I know it's kind of old, but I think the tape sound is great on this one. It's
I do
like
too. I
it's
do too.
super transparent. I like it way more than the J37 personally. I prefer the
Yeah.
Kramer a lot more, but yeah.
I the one thing you're not going to find in this interview is me talking bad about any plugin. I think that they're all great, and I think the J37 is great too. But I've been
Yeah,
using the Kramer for years, and there's something about the Kramer where it gives it sort of a patina that I really like. It adds some sort of like overall coloration to the sound in a way that really appeals to my ear,
yeah.
and so that's the one I tend to use. It's built into my sessions, and it's built into my templates and stuff like that.
That's a great one. Um, okay, so how do you achieve a balance, like a good balance in live recordings? Because of course you're sort of stuck with the levels of the individual players. But say for example, like the trumpets are just not cutting enough. Like what do you play with to kind of fine tune the balance, the volume balance of your mix? Do you sometimes layer VSTs on top, or do you just rely on moving the mics, the close mics? But then if you move the close mics up too much, like aren't you worried about getting a nasty tone, especially on the brass? So how do you get that good volume balance without ruining the tone in the live recording? Do you have any tricks for that?
Yeah, I mean, it's what everyone else would do. It's playing with the, for me, I always start with the mid distance mics. I always, I have my room picture that I have with my Decatry, my outriggers, my surrounds, whatever else I'm using. If it's an Atmos mix, my
Yeah,
Atmos mics and all that stuff, and then every section has a mid distance mic that's really the main player in my world for micromanaging the balances.
I
And
see.
then the spot mics I use, well, start going from high to low. I use less of the spot mics on the higher instruments because they just don't need it because they cut through much more. And then I do tend to use more of the bass and some of the cello spot mics because first of all, I like that sound. I like that kind of edgy, mid-rangey sound, and I'm not really again worried about creating a perfect snapshot. It's okay for me to sort of cheat the perspective a little bit in
Yeah,
terms of maybe the bass is feeling a tiny bit closer and stuff like that. Again, very very subtly. So if usually 95% of the work is done in the orchestration and in the performance. So if it's a massive change that they need, then the first thing I would do is see if I have another performance where the trumpets are
yeah,
playing louder. But if not, then I just start playing with the spot mics and the mid distance mics on the brass or the French horns. Usually the French horns, um, what I do is I have a stereo pair on the inside on the orchestra side, and then I have a stereo pair on the bell. And if I need more of the French horns, and those bell mics are off, I don't really use them as part of the mix, so I can always add those to get a little bit more brightness or a little bit more presence on the French horns. And the woodwinds, definitely my first move is to the overalls if it's what I need is more woodwinds.
mm-hmm.
But if I need more oboe, then obviously I have to go to the spot mic.
Yeah,
My feeling is if I do it, not subtly, but if I do it with the sense of making sure that my clarity is there, that I'm not my perspective doesn't get all fucked up, then I can usually get away with it.
yeah. Spitfire does the stereo close mics, so I like these a lot because they actually feel more natural. So I mix a lot of library music, so stuff made with VSTs, and I don't know. I noticed that spot mics, when I try to boost them, they just have this kind of nasty treble quality to them. It just doesn't feel like an ensemble anymore because, of course, you lose that natural diffusion of the room and natural dampening of sound as you get more distance. So I found that, yeah, mid mics, as you say, are super useful to get that volume balance without really getting that super close tone. But then also one more thing I like is putting a reverb on the close mics. Like I put the SP 2016. It's actually a reverb that I learned through you years ago, one of your videos, the original Eventide one,
I still use
2016
it.
stereo room. Yeah, same. But now I switched to the SP one because it's the newer
Yeah,
one.
me too. Me too.
Yeah, I mean the old one is bit more chorusy. It's nice, but it's just a bit more chorusy. I find that the vintage algorithm of the new one is just super realistic. So I love
Yeah.
this one. So yeah, what I
Well,
do is that I put the SP on vintage on the close mics, and it kind of allows me to push them more until they sound like a close mic,
yeah, sure. But yeah, I mean, and so, we're talking about two different things here. We're talking about a
Yeah.
live recording and we're talking about a VST sample. So, I find that samples just in general, by the time it gets into the sampler and playback, it's gone through, enough processing and
Mm,
stuff like that, that you can't, some of the rules don't apply that, you can't just look at, a sample library as if it's a live recording. It just doesn't, even if you have all of them, like even my libraries, my percussion library and stuff like that. There's, by the time it gets out of the sampler, it's already got some EQ and, even if it's just the output filters and stuff like that and all that. So I can see where that would be a problem. And in that environment, yeah, I could see that you might want to be able to do something like that. For me, I don't tend to have that problem as much. The only time I'll actually use reverb on a spot is is like to create an effect. Like if I want a really distant trumpet sound or something, I could put a long reverb on the trumpet. I actually have that built into my template so that I can put a reverb on individual mics
yeah.
and yeah.
Actually, I don't do this on samples. I meant when I want to rebalance the live recording. If I don't really have the choice on the balance, then I can just put a reverb on the close mics and turn it up. Of course, with sample libraries, you have each instrument separated, like violin one, violin two, so you can just play with that balance. Yeah, I agree. It wouldn't
Yeah.
really makes sense on the samples. But
But for me, what I tend to do
yeah,
is I tend to most of 95% of the time my reverb is being sent from the overall um, reverb and the overall aux of the return of the. So I have all of my orchestra going through an aux, and that is the aux I EQ and process and stuff like
yeah,
that, and that's where I send my reverb from. And so if it's really something that I need to rebalance, then that rebalance is built into that feed.
true,
So
true.
I'm pulling down the spot mics and stuff, and then in that case, I might have one of my reverbs there because I have 3 or 4 reverbs built into that. The way I do it, I'll make one shorter and more of a room simulation. Or now, what I've been using a lot is the Vienna Sound Library's Mir
Oh yeah, I
for,
heard this
for
one.
doing that. So I can build that room simulation back in, or as even an Altiverb or something like that. So that comes in really handy. But the balance I just actually had to do something recently where it was just recorded in a terrible room. So
Mm,
I basically had to take out all the room mics and just use the spots. So I had to sort of recreate a room, and that's what that's the way I would do it, is by having one send being an Altiverb or the Mir, and then another send maybe being my usual Bricasti or Seventh Heaven, and then maybe a lexicon, and just
yeah.
some sort of soup of the 3 reverbs adds up to, something that sounds organic to me.
Yeah, I think it's a really important concept. If you're going to chain reverbs, you can't really chain long reverbs. You kind of want to set your early reflection depth first with some kind of room simulation, and then you kind of want to put another kind of layer of hall on top, right? I think that's what you're saying.
Right.
Yeah, because I don't think so. I don't think that one plugin can recreate like depth if you're working from a closed mic. Like if you're working from a very dry source, like I never found like that one plugin can achieve the perfect depth. I always need more. I need like one reverb for the diffusion, just to sort of get rid of the mono fill to kind of spread things around, dampen the highs a little bit, and then put everything in a hole. And that's how you really get that real sound.
Right. So a lot of times, in my desire to try to keep my reverb as simple as possible, when I'm trying to get rid of that mono sound, I'll use that leap wing stage 1
Yeah,
and just take the mono signal and open it up a little bit, and that actually works really, really well for me to do that. And then that's one less reverb. The problem with using a lot of reverbs, you have to be careful because you can easily get sound cloudy.
true. I mean, it
Yeah.
messes with the time, like the tone
I
and the
was
time
I
definition.
certainly in my early mixing days was guilty of using too much reverb.
Ah, yeah, yeah. It's funny
I still
because
probably am. I
like
mean,
the
there are
more,
times where
yeah,
there are times where I'm accused of mixing too dry, and then there are times where I'm accused of mixing too wet.
and also everybody goes through phases. I mean, personally, like I know all my mixing engineer friends go through this, and I too. Like sometimes I have a phase where I like everything brighter, then I make everything too dark, then I like everything too wet. It's kind of like you
Yeah,
go through phases as well, and you kind of
yeah, sure,
overcompensate.
absolutely. And I
Mm,
think that one project can trigger you for the next 3 or 4 projects. If you're working
yeah,
in a certain style, then that style kind of will carry over to the next project.
yeah, true.
Got to be careful.
Um, okay, do you ever use full range compression on orchestral sounds, or rarely?
um, do I ever use full range compression?
Yes.
Sure. I mean, there's nothing I don't use. I mean, there are
Mm,
times where I'll use a very subtle. I mean, usually if I'm using full range compression, then what I'm trying to do is just sort of equalize the level of everything a couple of dB, to give me a little bit of a head start on automation and stuff like that. And so there are certain compressors that I like to use where I'll use quite a bit of. I'll have the threshold quite low or high,
yeah,
and the ratio like at 1.05 to 1, and then with a medium attack and a medium fast release, so that everything is kind of hitting it, but it's only a dB or so. You're
I
never really
see.
compressing more than a dB. It's sort of like a little bit of a mastering kind of compressor. And then I use some dynamic, dynamic EQ or dynamic compression now, however frequency based
Yes.
uh, compression at times with orchestras too.
Yeah.
But
So So full range compression, you're kind of using it more like a transparent leveler, basically.
Right, with a
I see.
transparent leveler that actually just gives me a little bit more gain and helps me with a little bit of the subtle stuff. So I can sort of start from a slightly, farther down the road, in a dense, obviously, if you're in a dense orchestral environment, plus, sample percussion, plus
Mm.
keyboards, plus synths, plus of a modern film score, you need a little bit of help to get you. So you do need a little bit of dynamic help and you need a little bit of frequency help to get you so that your orchestral elements are starting from a place that makes sense with everything else.
Yeah. Also, so I don't mix a lot of live recordings, but for the smaller rooms, I mixed like Budapest and like orchestras around there. And then I noticed that with smaller rooms, you get more transient, you get more dynamics. So sometimes you can actually extract more room out of the live recording if you compress it a bit more. Because like if you have like brass staccatos in a small room, you get more of that super big transient compared to like
Right.
an already very diffused Abbey
Well, it
Road signal,
depends on your attack speed. How
Yeah,
you very careful how you set your
exactly.
attack.
Don't want to leave all that transient too much
Right,
if
but
your
a
goal
room
is to
like
just raise
Budapest,
everything.
what's really important is, and a lot of those rooms is you really do have to do some subtractive EQ in
True.
the front
Mm.
end of it. A lot of times now there's another great plugin, the Sound Theory Gullfoss, and with the Gullfoss, it sort of does a really intelligent job of doing some of that. I used to spend hours doing subtractive EQ on bad recordings, and now the Gullfoss does almost all of it almost automatically. So
Yeah, I love it. I love it.
it
It's
just
like a
it saves
godsend.
me it saves me so much time.
Yeah, Golfos, I love this one. Like especially for like solo cellos. When you have a solo cello in like a bad room and you have nasty resonances on the lower notes, it just manages to detect the bad resonances pretty well.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it's a great plugin.
Yeah. I tend to use it as I don't really put it first, but I put it afterwards. I tend to kind of try to fix everything with subtractive EQ, and if it's still not quite right, I will put Golfos on top. Because
I do the exact opposite. I put the
really
Gullfoss
interesting.
first. Yeah, it's literally the first thing I put on it. Other than the only thing I would put before it maybe would be a high pass if I'm trying to get rid of room tone. Like if
Oh
there's some
yes,
additional room noise on a quiet. Like I always have like a fab filter with a high pass ready set for automation, and as things get quieter and the room tone gets too obvious, I automate. I'll clean that up. So that's the only thing I put before the Gullfoss.
no, I see. So
I
you let
figure I'd let
Golfos
that.
do its thing.
Yeah, I let it do all
Mm,
the work. Yeah.
mm, interesting. Yeah, so earlier you talked about mic positions, how you use the mid mics to tweak the balance of the orchestra. But can you talk a bit about what are the most important mic positions for you and how you kind of see them, how you see them being complementary and what you would watch out for when it comes to choosing mic positions? Basically, how do you build a mix with mic positions? That's my question.
The most important thing to me is really being aware of how the mics interact with each other. So what I'm trying to do is to create the clearest image I can. I'm trying to avoid, having mics too close together to where I'm, possibly getting combing, distances that are, just like I always get very nervous when I see recordings with, like all kinds of, I see like where there's overall mics on like three groups of sections next to each other, and you get mics that are 8 inches apart.
Yeah,
And to me, I all of that stuff I hear sort of the combing effect, the whistling effect, all that. So my first rule of thumb is I do a visual inspection of where I put the mics to make sure that I have what I would consider, and no, there's no professional. I mean, I'm not a professional. All I am is someone who's good at his hobby. But so I can't tell you what the distances are, but I do a visual inspection to make sure that no two mics are close enough together to where the interaction is going to be something that's going to create an artifact that I'm going to find unpleasant. And if I do have to do that because of a situation where I need to have a solo mic on, say, the principal player and a spot mic, that when I use the solo mic, I'm just using it specifically and I'm turning it on and off. And then maybe
Yeah.
even then I won't use the spot mic. So that I think a lot about making sure that that sort of environment is very clean. Other than that, my imaging is what I'm really looking for is as a starting point, as anyone else would, is trying to recreate the room uh, area with the slight modification, in my case, of is wide spreading the woodwinds a little wider than they would probably be spread in a traditional orchestral recording, because in a film, again, we're not trying to recreate an orchestral, a classical record. We're trying to create sort of an exciting image, and I found through the years that that's necessary. The other thing that I really make sure is that in my surround environment, my either 5.1 or 7.1 or Atmos, that the spot mics don't go to the center channel, because I find that by doing that, I can keep things sounding like, to me, the center channel, and something specifically in the center channel, it feels almost detached from the rest of the imaging. So I try to avoid that. I leave the center channel for the room mics. I leave center channel for things that are a little bit more gluey, that are part of a larger image, but something that's specific. I use left plus right as opposed to the center channel specifically, or I pan it across all three if that's what the situation calls for, maybe with a bass mic, or obviously like a Grand Casa or something where I do want to have some anchoring in the center, but I'm going to make sure it's also going to the left and right so that it doesn't feel like it's unnaturally sitting in the center of a surround image. That's obviously in stereo not an issue, but in
Yeah.
surround that easily can become an issue. In terms of the individual spot miking, again, I'm very minimal. If in a traditional orchestral setup, say we have 24 violins, 12 violas, 8 basses, 4 or 6, eight celli, 4 or 6 basses. Each section will get, except for the basses, will get only 2 spot mics per section. So violins will be violins 1 front, violins 1 rear, violins 2 front, violins 2 rear. Violas, in my case, the way I like to set it up is I try to get the violas near the center, and I put the spot mics left and right as opposed to
Yes.
front and back. And then with the cello again, but then I usually have a solo cello mic, so to tighten up the section. But then with the basses, I'll have 1 mic per stand. So if there's 6 basses, there's 3 mics.
That's very interesting. So your close mics aren't necessarily per instrument. You don't go too close then. You sort of treat them like a.
My close mics are about 7 feet.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
7 feet. Yeah. I see.
So 2.1, 2.3 meters.
Yeah. And so the idea with the violas is that you don't get a straight up mono sound this way.
Right.
Yeah,
That I have a little bit of widening from it.
exactly. Yeah. So nothing is perfectly mono, which I guess could cause problems with the dialogue in a movie, maybe if something feels too
It's
mono.
not only that, it's just my aesthetic. It's just what I like.
I see.
It's, the recordings I like have sort of that width. I like the way the violas sound when they're a little bit more spread. My thing is that there's 2 violin sections and 1 viola section, which is bullshit, because really it's all just voicing. It doesn't matter if it's a violin or a viola
Yeah.
or a cello, it's just voicing. So it depends on how it's written, but that's just the way I'm used to doing it, and when I first started out, that was, sort of what I got into the habit of doing. And but look, that changes too. Like when I'm at Abbey Road, sometimes when you have a larger string section, you can't get away with that, because if you have 32 violins and 16 violas, I can't take up that much space with the violas. So then I have to do front and back. So again, all rules are made to be broken. But if possible, I do it that way. And I try to use, with me, the spot mics are usually going to be Sheps, something that has a very nice mid-range presence, that aren't too super hyped up, that sort of give me, on the violins and violas, and then on the cello, what I've been using recently has been the Neumann M149s.
Oh yeah, these ones, they're good.
Yeah, yeah, I love those, and then on the basses, I change around a lot. I have some mics that, I actually will put up a couple of different spot mics on the basis because I find like my 47 has really great mid-range presence, but
Yeah.
it doesn't have quite the low end that my MKH 800 does. So I'll put up one 47 and one MKH 800 so that if I want more bigness from the basses, I could push the MKH 800 spot. And if I want more grizzle from the basses, I could push the 47 spot.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean the 47 is great on vocals, so it's like kind of a mid-range beast, to
Yeah,
really
it's
get that.
it's exactly what it is. It's everyone thinks it's a big low endy mic, and it's got
Yeah,
great low end, but it's not really about the low end. It's about the mid range on that
true,
mic.
true, true. And so speaking of that, you were talking about the stereo field of the violas. Do you care about the stereo width of the basses, like your low end? Because of course in orchestral recordings, you're not gonna have mono bass. It's not like a bass guitar. So do you ever kind of work on that low end, widen it, narrow it? Do you ever worry if the low end is too wide in an orchestral mix?
Yes, I do. I actually spend on every cue I work on. I sort of make decisions about, I start with the basses in their organic position. My first panning is I just take out all the spot mics.
Yeah.
I take out all the mid distance mics. I listen to the room, and then the room tells me where to put the mid distance mics and where to put the spot mics. So I start with that. So that, usually the basses, the way I set up, they don't start. Well, some studios they do, but they're either starting all the way on the right hand side of the orchestra, or they're starting in about 3 rows behind the cello and moving a little bit into the room like that. So I respect that setup, but I don't pan them all the spot mics in one. I spread them out based on where they're sitting. But then, like we mentioned before, sometimes I cheat the basses
Yeah,
and
true.
move it over a little bit just to create a little more warmth. And I'll do that in a situation where there is other elements in the low end, like synth elements or band elements.
Okay, so when it comes to building a mix, do you kind of apply the same philosophy? Do you first listen to the room? For example, you listen to your Decca tree or the outrigs, and you kind of build your mix from there? In what
Right. So
step
I
do you do?
listen to that. I
Yeah,
listen to that for my imaging. I listen to that for sort of the positioning, and also what do I want. I do that, and then I position things. But I only have to do that once, So if I'm working on a movie and I have 100 cues, I'm not doing that on every cue. I'm just
yeah.
I'm just doing that on once. And then the way my mix is set up, I have one fader that's the entire orchestra,
Hmm.
right? And I can control the overall level. And then I have a room, a mids, and a spot master fader. So then, per cue by cue basis, I decide how roomy I want the cue. What do I want to be the feature of the cue? Do I want it to be sound a little closer? Is it have a lot of activity? Is it an ostinato track? What is it doing? And then I determine accordingly what mics are going to be more featured. So it's not just a static setting that stays for the entire. Every single cue sort of
Yeah,
defines itself for what I want it to be.
that makes sense. I think I heard you saying in one video that you sometimes put more reverb on the violin ones. If you have like soaring violins that you really want to feel more roomy. So in cues where you have like a kind of an open sound, nothing too dense, you might put more reverb maybe, stuff like
Right.
that, or
So
more room
so
mics.
so there is always a reverb set up that's sending from the microphones,
Yeah.
but the general reverb for the orchestra is always sent on the entire orchestra uh, um, auxiliary because that already has whatever EQ and processing I'm doing. So I'm sending the final sound of the orchestra to the reverbs. In the case of if I need a little bit more swim on the violins, it's literally called the swim send.
Oh,
So
I
I
like
have a
that.
swim send that's
Mm.
available for any instrument on the orchestra. It might be the trumpet solo, it might be the violins, it might be a percussion clave or something like that, where I need to have a little bit more of an event or an effect on it, and so I could send it from there, and then I automate that on and off.
Yeah, I see. Mm. Okay, that's great. So do you use like the Kramer slap delay, for example, to get more of that swim? I'm just wondering.
No, the swim has tended to be an altiverb. It's
Okay, yeah, just more reverb. Mm.
yeah. There's some interesting settings that I like in the altiverb. If it's short, then what have I been using recently? It changes all the time.
I see. Yeah. all these new
And
plugins.
it's like, sometimes it's a 480, just if I want it really short, like I'll use some of the 480 effects sounds, like a brick wall or buck
Yeah,
ramp, something like
I
that.
find the 480 to be really kind of swimmy. Actually, it's kind of dark, and I mean it can be bright, of course, but it's kind
And
of
it's the 480 is very
messy.
wide. It's got a lot of width to it, which I really like.
Yeah, and it's a little bit messy as well, like compared to cinematic rooms, for example, which might be really clean, or VSS3, TC 6000. I find that the 480s are just really kind of dense. They create a big texture, so it makes sense.
The guys that designed the 480 algorithm also then went on to start a company called Bacasti.
Yeah, this one, that's the legendary one.
So, but you understand that when they made the 480, what they wanted to do next, Lexicon was not interested in doing. So they were not involved in the 960. They left the company and started Bacasti. So the Bacasti really is the evolution
Yeah,
480.
it's like a bit of a cleaner, more realistic 480. That's kind of what it sounds like to me.
Yeah.
Mm. So do you have any time-saving tricks or workflow tricks for score mixers? Because I have a few mixing engineers who watch my channel, and I'm wondering, like, any things you can do to work more efficiently. So maybe on Pro Tools, because I'm guessing that's what you use, or anything else, more generalistic workflow tips to just get things done, really well, but maybe more efficiently.
Well, I'm very into templates. So,
Yeah.
as I work on a score, I develop a template for that score. I have a template that I start with, and then I build it as I go. And then, with track presets, if I build, say I have a sound that, like for example, I just did this TV show, The Book of Boba Fett, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there were some signature sounds in there that occurred from cue to cue to cue. And what I did was I would save a track preset with all the plugins and all the reverb sends and the outputs and stuff. So when that sound would pop up, I don't have to recreate it every time. I recall the track preset and there's the sound. So I build a lot of track presets. I build track presets if I need to change, if I'm stemming and I need to take something from the high synth stem and put it to, a guitar stem. I have a track preset that does all the it has a script in there that does all the work. There's a lot of people are using this new it's not new anymore. This preset you could build presets in this thing called the
Wait, I think I know what
sound.
you mean. It's like the automatic thing.
Right. So I'm going to probably get
What is it
one of
called again?
those. I'm going to probably get one of those eventually. The only reason I don't is because when I work at home, I don't have any more desktop space.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm sort of limited in what I can do. But so that, and then I have a very very efficient template, and the way I do it is I do it with the way I build the template, and then how I build the layouts in my working flow, either on my S6 at remote control or my S1, my four S1s at home, so that I have a layout that's what I call my God layout, and that's got my mix return and the mock-up right next to each other so I can compare the two. Then it's got a master VCA, and then it's got all of the different, food groups, and then it's got each stem a master fader, right? So that's my layout number one. And then I might have a string layout and then a brass layout and a percussion layout and stuff so that I can go bam and I'm in the percussion world and I have all of my possibilities in the percussion, my high, my mid, my low, and then I can spill out all my mid percussion. So the layouts really save me a tremendous amount of time.
I see. So you start from a main template and then you customize it per project to really kind of work efficiently through many cues, I guess.
Right. So in the end of the day, I might have 10, 12 layouts built into my mix so that, by the end, there might be a situation where we know that certain cues are bigger than everything else. So we'll build a special layout for that one cue so that I don't have to have all this wasted space on all the other cues. Like if there's 7 passes of orchestra as opposed to 4 or 3 or 1, then I don't need to have all these empty spaces. I could just build it for 4M37 or whatever it is.
I see, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think templates are really powerful. I mean, composers also use them, and there is no. I mean, some people think there is like a sort of shame in using templates, and mostly the beginners think like, oh, I should start from scratch. But actually, I find that with templates you get there faster and better, so
I, I
everybody
haven't
wins.
started from I haven't started from scratch in 15 years.
Yeah, right. I
And
stopped
then
doing that long ago.
there's certain settings that I know I'm going to do, so I have them preset. There's certain plugins that I know I'm going to need to automate, so I have that
Yeah.
all ready to go, and all that, and just all the stuff that I know I'm going to do, I already have sort of built in and ready to go.
Yeah, you know what I do is that I have a Blue Cat Patchwork. I'm sure you know this plugin. It's like
Which
to
one?
build a Blue Cat Patchwork.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you know this one. So I build my effect chains in there. So that way across any door, I can just like grab my patchwork preset and I have my parallel chains or just any plugin
Right.
chain. It doesn't even have to be
Nice.
parallel. And that way I can just, like if I want my string widener technique, boom, I just pop it there. And so yeah, presets are
Are you
great.
limited in terms of what plugins you can use with that?
I mean, it's VSTs, so you can't load AAX, but as long as you have the VST versions of any plugin, it will load. Um,
It's funny.
so
I don't download I don't download the VST versions of the plugins.
yeah, I mean, I still use another DAW. I use Pro Tools mainly, but I still use FL sometimes, so I still have the VSTs. And
Yeah.
I mean, I download them just to run Patchwork. So basically, you just run the AAX of Patchwork in Pro Tools, but it runs the VSTs internally. So yeah, I
And
guess
you
I
don't
could
have
set
any,
the.
is there latency issues with all that
No, actually,
stuff?
it's really good. I don't know why, but it's like
What is it called again?
Blue Cat Patchwork,
Bluecast?
Blue Cat Audio, Blue Cat.
Spell it.
Okay, BLUECAT. Maybe I'm just not spelling correctly.
Blue Cat. Well,
Yeah,
no, it's I have a very Blue Cat patchwork. Okay. Well, I'm gonna look into that, my friend.
and it's great
Actually,
because you can just make many parallel chains as insert. Like you can have I think 4 or 8 even parallel chains. So I'm kind of tired of doing auxes personally, because many of my parallel chains I actually want to put stuff afterwards. So I kind of want my parallel chain to be just a step in the process. So as an insert, and then I can put more plugins after. uh, because I want the other plugins to affect the output of the parallel chain plus the dry signal. So doing this with an aux would be kind of a pain because I would need to also put the next plugins after on the aux. So I just create my parallel chain with Blue Cat Patchwork, and then I can add more stuff later and even add sends
hmm.
afterwards. So
I
it's
just got
like,
a.
yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. Sorry, I was done.
Yeah, I just got an Eventide H9000, so I've been doing a lot of building of Eventide. You can do such really elegant, chaining together beautiful Eventide plugins in 5.1
Oh,
in
that's really
in
cool.
in the 9000. It's a hardware unit,
Yeah,
so
that's cool.
yeah.
I don't have any hardware,
Does
but in the
does
future.
Blue Cat Patchwork work in surround?
I don't think so. I mean, actually, maybe because I know they make 5.1 plugins, so you would have to check it out. It's possible, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, I'm gonna look at this. Very good. Thank you.
No worries.
Earned your money for the day. Yeah.
Okay, so let's go with the last question then. So, how do you use dynamic EQ in an orchestral setting? Can you talk a bit about your process? Because I know dynamic EQ can save you in many situations, but when you misuse it, it can also make everything flat. So, how do you kind of approach choosing dynamic EQ versus static EQ?
Well, very gently. There's basically two dynamic EQs that I use. One of them I have on my actual stem bus limiter, which is made by it's made by whole grain, and it's called the Quartet, and it's basically a limiter with a very very super clean, super fast dynamic EQ, almost so fast that you almost can't make your attack time too short. And in here, I always do the same thing. I sort of I have one frequency sitting at about 250 and one frequency sitting at about 2.5K, and they're both set to very very gentle dynamic EQ, and they're constantly riding those frequencies when they get a little too built up, because that's where for me most of the problem occurs is I get a little built up in the boxy region and in the harsh region. So I do that, and then to the same effect, sometimes if I need a little bit more management, I use the FabFilter multiband, and I create. You could take there's 5 possible points that you can have running at the same time, and I create all 5 and I squeeze them together as much as I can. And I put them on the low end, and I treat it as one threshold with the maximum of 2 dB worth of gain reduction, and then I just have it so that it's just really gently controlling, the frequencies that are based on it. So the highest frequency might be 400, or
Yeah.
800, and so like when things start getting a little bit boxy in that range, it'll just take it down a bit, and then but it'll cross over very gently to the one next to it, and so that it's a very gentle sort of sloping curve that occurs. And then because a lot of times I'm going to add a little bit of overall low end, so when I do that, I could create a big problem with the boxiness. So that's the way I use dynamic EQ on an orchestral recording. There's no major, I mean, every now and then, if I want to have a super warm sound, the quartet actually has this thing called rotation, which is an old
Hmm.
George Massenburg concept, where it's actually working as an expander until it's working as a compressor, so that it actually warms it up until it finds that, oh, we've crossed the point where it sounds good. I'm now going to bring it down. But
Interesting.
it's a dynamic threshold, so it's a little bit complicated, and I couldn't set it from scratch if I tried, but fortunately they give you a good amount of presets to be able to set it with. But
So,
it's a fantastic plugin. It really is it's one of the most expensive and one of the best plugins I've ever worked with.
so it's a bit like expansion and compression in
It
one.
is, but it's a little bit more than that because it also has dynamic threshold.
So it's like
So
NV2 on steroids, basically.
you kind of, yeah, you got to try it.
Oh, interesting.
You
Oh,
have to give it a try. Yeah,
I want to try it now. Sounds unique.
it's a little bit different. It's got a very you have to get used to the user interface because it's not really built to be pretty. As a matter of
Hmm.
fact, it's if anything, I would think that Dwayne built it to be ugly because it's pretty ugly. But I'm used to it, so it's not that hard for me to use. And there's a lot of things it can do that I don't know how to do, but for what I use it for, it works really, really well. It's probably on every mix I do.
Well, I'm gonna check it out. I never heard of it actually, so that's I'm
Uh,
definitely gonna check it out.
yeah, it's a company's called Whole Grain.
Okay.
WHOLEGRAIN.
I never
And
heard of this company.
I get nothing for speaking about it. So this is
Okay, but
just,
still, I think everybody's going to check it out now.
well, it's a small company, and that's what they're looking for is support. And so I do support them. I've been using the plugin for years now. So, you know, all
Great.
of my team have it. It's always on the last insert of each aux, of each master aux. So whatever I
Yeah.
do before it, that's my final stop.
Thanks for the tip.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you very much, Ellen, for coming on here and talking about orchestral mixing and sharing all your tips. So yeah, I hope you have a really nice new year, and I guess good luck with your projects.
Thank you. And everyone have a great new year. Stay safe. We're almost through this thing. We'll get through it. And I'll see you in France at some point this year. And hopefully we're going to have a great 2022.